Hello, I'm back again to take another closer look at one of ToyBiz's 12-inch Lord of the Rings Special Edition Collector Series figures. This will be the last video in the series for a while at least, because we have come to the end of my own personal collection, although I am always on the lookout for the others that I may pick up over time. But today I thought I would end on a real high note for this series. It is Legolas. So, as ever, let's start off by looking at the packaging. Well, by now, we'll all be very familiar with this packaging if you've seen the other videos in this series. We do have this red theme for the two towers specifically this time, but in the background we can still see the Middle Earth map. On the borders we have that runic writing, and of course at the top of the packaging we have the One Ring, which is very nicely stylized. It is cut out there so we can see the figure underneath, which is brilliant. We have an image of Legolas at the bottom right hand corner of the packaging, just kind of stuck on there, and by now you'll all know my personal feelings about this, but pretty consistent with the other figures in the line so far. On the side panel we can see the Middle Earth map, which of course wraps around the entire packaging, which is a really nice touch. We have some slightly random images here. We have Frodo and Sam and we have Saruman. I've mentioned in other videos that this seems slightly illogical. I've never quite understood why they did this really. I think it would have made much more sense to have that image of Legolas that we saw on the front of the packaging on the side panel here, and then we could have stacked these figures up and we would have seen all the different characters in the series. Then on the reverse of the packaging we have a little bit of information about the Lord of the Rings. We have a little bit of bio about Legolas himself. We have that image from the front of the packaging again replicated on the back here. And at the very top we can see the silhouette of Frodo, Sam and Gollum. All in all, it's a bit text heavier, and again I think the placement of that image of Legolas here is just a little bit clunky, a bit random. It's not particularly stylized, but I've always really liked the silhouette, and I like that changes between each film that is replicating, so I think that is a really nice touch. And then finally we have that folding flap. If we open that up on the front of the packaging, on the other side we can see the One Ring again. Of course we can see that Middle Earth map, which is running through the entire packaging. We have some specific information about Legolas and his history here, which is really very nice. And then on the right hand side we have the window display, again showing off this figure in all of his glory. And this looks absolutely tremendous. I love that they have these folding flaps. I think they look really presentable. You can put these on display and they look fantastic. But moving on to the figure himself, well, I think the thing that's most striking about this figure is the costuming. I love this series for the amount of detail they've put into the costume and the effort that's gone into the tailoring. But before I wax lyrical about those elements, I do have to address the elephant in the room, which is of course the head sculpt. And as we've seen with this line, head sculpts can be hit or miss, and I'm afraid this is one that kind of falls in the middle. This isn't a terrible likeness of Orlando Bloom, but it's not sharp either. I think saying it's soft is being generous. It is slightly off in a lot of key dimensions and areas. It doesn't look quite right. It's a little bit too elongated, I think, and a little bit too pinched to be an accurate reflection of Orlando Bloom's Legolas. But I think if you're happy to accept a more generic Legolas, then this is probably going to be just fine. Yeah, it's not a fantastic head sculpt by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably one of the weaker likenesses, as we saw with Aragorn, but it's not bad. I don't think it's as weak as the Aragorn, but it's not as sharp as, say, the Gandalf, which was really, really good. The other thing that's really interesting about this sculpt is the fact that they've sculpted the hair in a solid plastic, which is absolutely fine, and it's nicely painted. There's some decent paint apps here as well. It isn't just one colour. You can see a different wash running through that to give it texture, which is really nicely done. But they have sculpted it so that on the right hand side his hair is kind of waving out, so he's permanently in this sort of windstruck pose. Now at first this bothered me a little bit because, like, well, it doesn't apply to all situations, but it might have actually been a masterstroke because it certainly helps with the articulation, as we'll see a little bit later. But moving on to the actual detailing of this costume, there is an awful lot to talk about. We can see there's so many different textures here. First off, we can see at the very top of his hood here, that leaf, which of course is a separate plastic piece. It's actually got its own paint apps on it. We can see some silver detailing around the edges, which is really nice. This is sewn in to the top of his collar, so this is a really nice touch. But then of course we can see all these individual leather straps and buckles holding everything together, which I think is really very nice. We can see two layers or two fabrics used in the top of his tunic. We can see the sort of cotton that is his underneath tunic for the base of his costume, but on top of that we have this felt layer just over the top of his chest and torso area. That's one of the things I really love about this series, is using all these different fabrics, because it gives them this really luxurious real world feel that just makes them feel a lot more textured and a lot more authentic than what we're used to seeing for a 12-inch mainline series like this. On the shoulders we can see a new texture. This is a plastic piece that has been sculpted to look like the boiled leather that we see in the film. I think this is actually pretty effective. It has numerous different sculpts within to give that effect, which I think is very, very nice. And of course it is actually sewn into the costume, but painted on the shoulder pads here we can see the effect of those clips as well. So I think they've done a very, very nice job of bringing this to life, and it actually works surprisingly well. Around the waist we have another faux leather belt strap with working metal buckle, and of course we also have his sword sheath, which we'll look at in a moment. But also I wanted to point out down the sides of his apparel here we can see this ribbon effect as well to make it look like it's been sewn in. This is really attractively done. Again, adds another layer, another texture to this costume, and just really helps all of this come together to really pop and look really, really nice. And there's so much to see here when you start exploring this figure. It's really very, very rich. He also has plastic gauntlets. Again, these look very, very nice. They've done a good job of sculpting these, and there's some decent paint apps here with the gold to really help these little details flourish, which I think is really nice. And you'll see between the gauntlet and between his shoulder, you can see there's actually another layer. This is a silky blue undershirt for this figure, which again is just a hidden little gem that you don't immediately notice is there. Then of course we have his sword sheath. This is a plastic piece, but again, very nicely sculpted with lots of little details and flourishes, but also wonderfully painted as well. We can see the gold, we can see the brown, we can also see a bit of a paint wash running through this, and this is very distinct and looks pretty authentic, which is fantastic. His boots are made from a felt material. They are velcro together. They have the nice shape and look that they do in the film, and we can even see some embroidered detail on the shins of this particular boot, which I think looks absolutely fantastic. I think these look and feel really, really awesome. And underneath we actually have a plastic piece to indicate the sole and give him that stability when he stands freely, and even that has scuff marks from his travels, which I just think is a wonderful little touch that is just so unexpected. But that's not all, because he has a much thicker, harder cased cloak going around him, and it even has a working hood which you can pull up over his head, and again that's where that sculpting with that hair there works very, very well. So this is absolutely fantastic. Meanwhile, on the back of this figure there is a cutout that allows this to cut through the cloak and connect to his back and stay firmly in place, and of course it has his quiver and all of his bits and pieces here as well. This looks absolutely brilliant, a really nice sculpting job, but wonderfully painted as well. Lots of different colours here, lots of different washes to make it look lived in and authentic and textured, and I just think this looks absolutely brilliant, particularly the gold detailing on the image there that we can see on their central quiver. I think just looks fantastic. So that is definitely my word for this figure. Fantastic. It is brilliant. I love the depth and detailing on this costume. Okay, so moving on to articulation, he does have a swivel at their neck there, so his head can spin from side to side. Thankfully, because they have sculpted his hair this way, there is actually no hindrance to him being able to do this, which is brilliant, so I'm really, really pleased with this. His head does not nod forwards or backwards, unfortunately, though. He does have those ball joints in the shoulders, and these are a very generous joint. It allows the arm to come all the way into the centre of his chest and all the way back there, but also lift quite high up and down as well, which is great. There is also a complementary bicep swivel, a double jointed elbow, which allows the arm to go right the way back, and he has a swivel at the wrist as well. Now, there is a little bit of articulation in the torso, but I can't seem to get an awful lot out of this. It will turn from side to side and kind of bend forwards and backwards, but not a huge amount. He does have ball joints in the hips, so the legs do kick out to the side, they kick forwards, and they kick back a little bit too. The knee bends to 90 degrees, lifting that lower leg up there, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, there is a final hinge at the ankle. Now, of all the figures in this series, Legolas is the one who is most laden with goodies and accessories. So he comes with his bow, 3 arrows, a sword, and twin scimitar daggers. The bow is very nicely sculpted and wonderfully painted. There's a lot of detail in here which is absolutely fantastic. A lot of different paint washes as well. There's some silver paint mixed with the creamy white, which is brilliant. And of course that bowstring is actually a working string as well, which is very nice. You'll notice on the side there is actually this individual clip here that will slide onto his hand, so it looks like he's holding the bow correctly, which is fantastic. The arrows are nicely sculpted and they're nicely painted. There's a couple of different paint apps on here, which is lovely to see. So there's a nice bit of detail on them. Although I have to say, mine straight out the back was a little bit bent and misshapen. So this is obviously something we saw reoccurring throughout this series. Some of the swords, for example, could be wavy and inexplicably so in certain cases. So some of the materials they used didn't always work out quite well. But nevertheless, nice to have, and they look pretty good in the quiver. Now, whilst the bow works very, very nicely and he's able to hold this with no issues and it looks really good and it's a nice firm grip that he has on it, which is brilliant, this doesn't really work with the arrows. There's no way he can really comfortably hold these or be able to position it so that he's able to put the arrow against the bow so it looks like he's about to fire it. It doesn't really work. It's not, the articulation doesn't allow for it, and the way he's holding the bow doesn't really allow for it, and as I said, there's no way for him to really properly hold the arrow to be able to get it in a position where it looks good. So that's the only downside with this. This sword though is pretty cool. It's quite different to the other swords that we've seen in the series. It's a little bit shorter, a little bit thicker. Again, really nice sculpting, particularly on that hilt there. It looks really cool, and again, very nicely painted. He has absolutely no issues holding this in his right hand. This looks really good and authentic, and it does slide into his sheath very comfortably and easily as well, and looks pretty good. Again, the scimitar daggers, very nicely sculpted, very different kind of weapons that we've seen in this line, which is brilliant. And of course, the paint apps are magnificent. We can see that individual elvish sort of detailing on the blade, which is gold tinted, which is lovely. Sadly, due to the limitations of the way the hands have been sculpted, he can only hold one dagger at a time, which is a little shame. It would be nice to see him holding both, but hey, it's still a really nice extra to have, and it looks pretty cool. Of course, these arrows pop into the quiver nice and easily. There's a huge space here that could actually hold a few more if we wanted. And then either side of the quiver, we actually have straps to be able to insert the scimitar daggers as well. And again, they just slide into position very, very easily and comfortably and look really, really good. So Legolas can hold all of his accessories at one time. And there you have it. I have to say, despite some of the limitations of this figure, the head sculpt being not quite as accurate or sharp as I would like, and some of the limitations around the being able to hold some of these accessories, particularly with that left hand, all in all, I have to say, I do love this figure. I think this figure is one of the best in this series. I love the detailing and texturing on this costume. I love this series as a whole for that because I think it is fantastic. But Legolas, I think, is probably the best, probably has the most layers and intricacies of any of the figures in this line. And then he comes with an absolute wealth of goodies and accessories as well, which make him have a variety of different looks and different poses you can put him in to make him look really, really cool. So I think this is a really, really fun figure in this line, and probably one of the star entries in my opinion. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.